I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And I'm joined now by my regular weekly guest, San Antonio Express News Course reporter, Elizabeth Zavala. Great to have you on as always, Liz. We are talking about some unfortunate cases today. That's often the case when we do our recordings of The Docket each week, but perhaps more so today than in other days. Tell me about a San Antonio mother that's been arrested after her disabled son unfortunately passed away due to malnutrition and dehydration.
Yes, Chance. Hey, it's good to be back too. It's been a little quiet at the courthouse, but I wanted to talk with you today about a case that we will definitely be revisiting from time to time. Alma Munoz is 47 years old, and she was arrested on September 23rd and charged with serious bodily injury to a disabled person. This is a story that my colleague Faris Sabawi wrote for mysanantonio.com this week. And what we've discovered here through Faris's story is that in May, Munoz called police because her 21-year-old son, Joshua Alonzo, had died in their home. And when EMS arrived, they saw that Joshua Alonzo was infested with lice, and there were visible, his bones were visible through his skin, signaling to them that he was malnourished. So a little bit about Joshua. He suffered from cerebral palsy and schizencephaly, which is a brain birth defect. So he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't use the restroom by himself or really give any sort of expressive speech, according to the arrest warrant affidavit that Faris was able to get and write from. So when the autopsy was conducted on Joshua, he weighed roughly 38 pounds, and his death was ruled by the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office as the cause was ruled as malnutrition and dehydration. So according to this affidavit, detectives were able to track down the pediatrician that Joshua had seen throughout the years, and the pediatrician said that he had actually stopped treating Joshua when he turned 18. So the last time that Joshua saw a doctor, according to this affidavit, was in 2014 when he weighed only 51 pounds. Now, again, this is a 21-year-old man who weighed 51 pounds. So police were able to determine that Alma Munoz was Joshua Alonzo's only caretaker. And she told authorities that she saw lice in his hair about 3 weeks before he died, but it was not treated. So according to the affidavit, Munoz told authorities that she hadn't taken her son to a doctor or for any type of therapy after he turned 18. We're unclear as to why that happened, but police also said that they had not received any calls to the house where they lived in, the past 3 years or so. So at this point, Alma Munoz, 47 years old, is charged with a first-degree felony, which is punishable, for up to life in prison. And she's currently being held on a $75,000 bond, according to jail records. So we're going to be talking more about this case as it makes its way through the court, Chance, because, this sounds like a really horrible case. And unfortunately, it's one that, isn't, just something that happens, locally. We've seen it happen statewide. We've seen it happen nationally and internationally where, people, children, in many cases it's children, are either abused or injured. The terminology sometimes you'll see is injury to a child causing serious bodily injury by omission. And in that case, one that we talked about not too long ago, Josiah Williams, that was the case where 3 people actually went to prison in that case because the child was basically starved, according to court records.
Yeah, we can definitely take some time in today's episode to talk about both nationally cases like this and then certainly ones that took place in the San Antonio area. But to go back to what we've just discussed so far, this really horrific tragedy, someone who, as you've mentioned, disabled son of this woman who's now charged in his death, died of malnutrition, dehydration. They found lice in his hair. His mother says that was only about 3 weeks in the making, and then he passed away. Are there any other details of why he was allowed to be in this state? Has she or anyone else in the family, was it difficult for her? Was money an issue? Was she, is there any type of reasoning how things got this bad, or do we just not know these details yet?
We really don't know these details yet. This is a pretty fresh case. And I'm convinced that, once there is an indictment and we actually can start seeing, the court file, whenever it's assigned to a court, we actually start seeing that file fill up. We'll be able to talk more about the details in this particular case, because this is going to be one, I'm going to assume, based on how I have observed court cases move through the system, I'm imagining that unless there's a plea agreement reached in this case, Munoz likely will go to trial within about a year to a year and a half, maybe maximum 2 years, because that's about as long as it takes. Now, if there's a plea agreement reached, we may see something about this pretty soon, but we're going to definitely keep our eyes on this case.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. And then going back to what you said earlier, Liz, I know there's been a high-profile case out of California, and then, of course, you mentioned something out of San Antonio. Why don't we take some time to discuss both of those?
Right. This, it's really horrible, to see some of these cases, and one, the one locally that comes to mind, the most recent, was the case of 5-year-old Josiah Williams, who was beaten and so malnourished that he weighed 38 pounds at the time of his death. So just to update you on that, Josiah Williams was found bruised, emaciated, and unresponsive on December 27th, 2012, just 2 days after Christmas, at the home that he shared with his father, stepmother, half-sister, and stepbrother. And this was in the 3900 block of Gale in San Antonio. And when first responders arrived, I remember this case, the case, because I covered the sentencing of 2 of the 3 people and also a trial in this case, and the details were just pretty brutal. When first responders arrived, his eyes were black and swollen shut, and his body had showed multiple injuries that were in various stages of healing. And in fact, one of the first responders, when he testified, talked about how the child was almost in rigor mortis when they arrived. So what we were able to find out was that the child was said to have been kept in a closet away from the other children, and adults did not feed him. They didn't take him to school or to the doctor for care. So there were 3 defendants in this case. The father, Charleston Williams, was actually the third defendant accused and sentenced. He was sentenced to 40 years for his role in the, I guess you could say, the abuse and neglect of his son. And that, the father, Charleston Williams, was sentenced in March of this year. Now, his wife, who was the stepmother for Josiah, Crystal Williams, was sentenced to life in prison in June 2016 for her role in this case, being that she was the primary person at home during the time while Charleston worked. And Crystal's mother, Gloria Prue, was tried, convicted, and sentenced in September of last year to 88 years in prison for her part in the child's death. And during the sentencings and of Crystal and Charleston Williams, and also during the criminal trial of Gloria Prue, it was determined that Crystal and Gloria were the primary people who were at the house. And, it was probably one of the most gruesome, I think, that I've covered, in regard to a child. So, these things, they unfortunately, they keep happening. And again, in different parts of the world, you mentioned the national case, that involved 13 children who lived with their parents in California. Now, I'm going to cite a CNN story that talked about how, for years, the starving children that lived near Los Angeles, they were between the ages of 2 and 29 years old. And reports indicated that they suffered years of torture and neglect, and they were also taunted in many ways and controlled by whether or not they were going to be able to eat food. So it's really interesting, Chance, that a lot of these cases that involve parents and their children, at least what I've seen in 33 years in Texas, is that a lot of these cases end up involving using food as a punishment. And that has always really kind of stumped me because, parents with their kids, most people are just very, very loving and attentive, to their children. You never really think about a parent actually withholding food from their children.
Yeah, it's really cases like these, Elizabeth, that show the value of child protective services and those types of programs that often go underfunded in good years in states across the country, let alone if there's an economic downturn. So kind of one of those things that, you really open your eyes to the need for something, unfortunately, when sad cases like these do occur. But I think that's going to be it for today's episode. I really don't have much more to add to this, really just sad cases all around, but it will be interesting, as you noted, to hear more about this San Antonio mother we first started talking about, arrested after her disabled son died of malnutrition, dehydration. You kind of gave out some rough timelines, which I think are probably very accurate given all your history with the Bexar County Courthouse. This is going to be you said about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years if it goes the full length of the system. And if there's some kind of plea deal, maybe much quicker than that. So we'll just have to wait and only time will tell. But once again, great to have you back on the show this week, Liz. And we'll talk to you about a week from now.
Thanks a lot, Chance. We'll definitely touch base again.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News Courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me once again for The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio and Bexar County from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Storland.